I now call upon the speaker for this debate, Jens Fischer, to join these proceedings.
Can I just say two things before we start? Firstly, could everybody please turn off their cell phones, just to make sure, unless you haven't done already. Don't want to be interrupted. And the second thing is this. I've been asked to chair this debate when I just came in the door after 6 hours of traveling. I'm a little tired. And I think it's important that you all join in this, because I honestly believe that you cannot be a good debater if you don't know how judges think. And the best way to learn how judges think is by judging yourselves. Can I just have a show of hands? Who of you has never judged a debate in any format? Oh wow, that's quite a few. All right. Who of you has never judged a British parliamentary debate? That looks like a majority. Okay, so there's no time to give you a run of the things you would have to look at. What I would like you to do is try to find out which of the teams convinces you most. Okay, so you would in the end be able to start with a communication about how would you rank the teams? 1, 2, 3, 4 is just good enough. Or if you say the 2 proposition teams were better than the opposition teams, that's also going to be fine. Okay? Speaker, or the other way around. Speaker points, individual justifications are not that important at this point. It's just that you get a feeling, and then I will tell you mostly what I've seen in the debate. We can see whether we agree or not, because we don't have time to discuss everything. But just to give you sort of a first idea, a glimpse of what it's like, and especially you will see how hard it is to listen carefully for 56 minutes. You want to take notes. Okay, you want to have a piece of paper and you want to take notes so you know what's going on. Are there any questions at this point? Okay, so let me quickly introduce the speakers to you. First proposition here, we have Debbie Newman and Sam Greenland. First opposition, we have Filip Dobranic and Maya Cimerman. In the second proposition, we have Sam Natale and Lucas Karas. And in second opposition, we have Steve Llano and Loke Wing Fatt. And then I'd like to call upon the House to order. The motion before the House for this introductory debate reads, listen carefully, this House would punish parents for the crimes of their minor children. Yay! And without further ado, I'd like to call upon the Prime Minister Delhi to open this debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, youth crime is a serious and growing problem. In my hometown of London, we are facing an epidemic of teen knife and gun crime at the moment. In this situation as it stands at the moment, in this case, the person who wields the knife suffers consequences, the victim suffers consequences, the victim's families suffer consequences, society as a whole, because of the fear it instills, suffers consequences. But the people who don't suffer any consequences at all are the parents. They can stand by like any passerby and say, oh, isn't it terrible? But we don't think they are like any other innocent passerby, ladies and gentlemen. We think both in principle they should be responsible and have to face consequences, but also in practice we think they are responsible for the behaviour of their children. And that's why we want to change the law to make sure that as well as children having to suffer consequences for their crimes, so do the parents. And so I'm going to tell you exactly what it is that we're going to implement today, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to introduce a law that says that when a child under the age of majority, which varies from country to country, commits a crime and is prosecuted for that crime, there is simultaneously a prosecution of the parents, essentially for negligence for the fact that this crime is taking place. We see that parents here, we see as any legal guardians. We understand in the 21st century parents aren't always genetic. They can come in all shapes and sizes, they can come in 1s, 2s, 3s, but whoever are the legal guardians for the parents have to fulfil this. In terms of the punishment, it would be on a sliding scale. It would go from anything from a fine through to imprisonment if the situation required it, and we would also support when it came with things like compulsory parenting classes, etc., to make sure that support was also provided in these situations. When deciding on what punishment was going to be put into place, the courts would look at the seriousness of the crime that the child had committed, the age and autonomy of that child in committing that crime, and the level of responsibility that they felt that the parents had had towards this particular crime. But what are we actually going to tell you today? Why do we want to impose this model? As we say, it's about the idea of encouraging responsible parenting and making parents suffer the consequences of their children's actions. I'm going to talk to you firstly about the nature of parental responsibility. I'm going to go on to look at how this particularly impacts on the area of how parenting affects a child's likelihood of committing crime, and I'm going to finish by looking at how this particular law will actually affect parenting in the short term. Sam's going to go on in his speech to look at the long-term effect this is going to have on parenting and on children themselves. So on to the first idea, because firstly we have to establish this idea that parents are in some way responsible for their children. And what we say is there's no greater responsibility than being a parent. On the first hand, you get an awful lot of rights that come with being a parent, rights over your children. You get to make decisions for them, you get to name them and clothe them and decide what school they go to and where they live, and what punishments that you're going to put onto them. You get to ground them, and all sorts of things that you can't do to anybody else. And with that comes a whole level of responsibilities. You have to feed them, you have to clothe them, you have to ensure that they go to school, and a whole number of issues. And the reasons we allow parents those rights and responsibilities in lieu of their children is because we don't recognise that children are yet fully formed citizens. They're developing citizens. Both in practice, they're developing their practical understanding of the consequences within the real world, but also on a more moral level. They're developing their moral code and they're developing their sense of conscience. And that's why we don't allow them to make these decisions for themselves and put the parents in their place.
But even under the status quo, we, after a child comes into a court, consider parents for negligence, and that's why we consider them irresponsible.
We consider parents for negligence under laws about child abuse. If the parents are committing neglect on the child, then there's an issue in that. But what this is a new crime for is the idea of actually, if your child shoplifts, that means you're negligent. That's what the negligence is. It's the negligence in having allowed the crime to take place. Very much as we see also within corporate situations. So this is absolutely new. We don't at the moment make parents responsible for this. But the reason why we think particularly in these cases of crimes, we have to keep this parental responsibility is because it is parental behaviour that leads to the likelihood of children committing crimes or not. In the end, if you are the kind of parent who picks up your child from school, sits with them while they're doing their homework, has dinner with them, sets a bedtime for them, punishes them if they break a rule, makes sure that there are rules there in the first place, kisses them, listens to them, shows them interest and attention, then the likelihood is if they're going to get on very well in life, they're not going to get in trouble at school, they're going to do well and they're not going to commit crimes. On the other hand, there are a whole list of things that you can do as a parent that will make it considerably more likely that your child will fall into criminal behaviour. I'm going to give you 7. I think you'll probably be able to think of some more as well, but I've only got time for 7 at the moment. Firstly, physical absence. The idea that you're not actually there in the evenings knowing what your children are doing because you're out working your overtime. So they could be out in the streets doing anything or everything and you don't even know because you're not there. Secondly, the absence of any kind of discipline. The idea that you don't have any sort of sense of consequences or rules within your own home. Because children learn by testing boundaries. They see how far they can go, and it's only when discipline kicks in that they understand that they've hit that boundary in that sense. Thirdly, the absence of support and belief in your child. If you have aspirations in your child, if you believe they can succeed and you support them in that, then they are likely to go down good routes if you encourage them in it. Next, the idea of absence of moral upbringing. It is dependent on a parent to try and make sure that a child develops a sense of right or wrong. There are some things, it's a philosophical idea about whether or not we're just born innately with the idea of what things are right or wrong. But there are certainly an awful lot of things which are against the law, which are societal, and which need to be encouraged through parents. Next, the idea of bad role modelling. If you see your parents hitting each other or drinking or behaving in a bad way, then you yourself are more likely to model that behaviour. Sixthly, an atmosphere where drugs or alcohol is in the house can affect children. And seventhly, if you allow access to things which actually enable the crime. For example, if you leave drugs or guns out within your house in a way that children can affect them. You see, there are an awful lot of things that parents can do which will actually affect whether or not their children commit crime or not. So we think they should suffer some consequences if they do. What we actually think that our law will do is incentivise parents to change their behaviour. We think this on 2 levels. Firstly, because some parents, unfortunately, don't care as much about their children as they do about themselves, And if there are going to be consequences for themselves in the law, then they will be more likely to act, because the actual idea of the punishment and the stick will kick in. But secondly, because this also shows that we do think that they're accountable. And by establishing that sense of parental responsibility in law, we establish it and send out the message strongly in society. So because parents are responsible for their children and they must face consequences, and we want to incentivise good behaviour, we beg to propose.
Thank you, Debbie, for your comments. I would like to call upon the leader of the opposition, Filip, to open his side stage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, we have a couple of problems with today's proposition, and we're going to tackle right into them, but in the argumentation of the opposition team, what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at the nature of delinquency and of delinquency that happens with minors. We're going to take a look how parents cannot be held responsible for all the crimes that minors actually commit, and we're going to take a look at if we expect that, what happens if we actually expect that a minor is responsible and how this relieves the responsibility from the parent. Then Maya is going to take a look at how, in order for a judicial system to work, for our society to actually function, we need individuals that are held responsible by themselves, not that someone else suffers consequences for something else they do. Now, a couple of problems we have with today's proposition. The first thing is that they say that a parent doesn't suffer consequences. Now, we firmly disagree with this notion, because at the moment they say the whole society suffers consequences, they contradict themselves. The second point is, how can a parent not suffer consequences when his or her child kills someone or commits a crime? He is judged by the society, he is severely disappointed by his child, and we believe this is simply a wrong point. Now, secondly, they talk about this some kind of prosecution of negligence, which they never explain. Even when Maya offers a point and asks them about this fact, shows them that we already prosecute parents for negligence, they say, yes, but this is something different. We're doing something new. That's not enough. We're not willing to support a proposal that doesn't defy anything that they are doing. Now, their first argument, no, thank you, madam, you had your chance. Now, the first argument talks about the responsibility of parenting. Now, they talk about this huge problem of minors that are committing crimes. Now, let's take a look at their 7 things that they are supposedly giving to you as the reason these minors commit crimes. Now, the first thing is physical absence. 1, we already prosecute parents for negligence if they're physically absent from their children. Secondly, how can you be a member of the minority, someone who just came to that country, you're an immigrant, you have to work 2 jobs in order to survive, the society completely failed you, and then the country still expects from you to take care of your children. We see the problem in the society itself, in the government. No, thank you. Now, the second is the absence of discipline. How are they going to check on the court if there was any discipline? How are they even going to measure the right amount of discipline? We believe this leads to abuse in the court of justice. Now, third thing, the expectations. We're talking about the same abstract thing. We don't even know what we're talking about. Fourth, the idea of having a right or wrong something, which will be dealt by Maya, but again, we're dealing with an abstract issue, and Maya will show you how the right or wrong issue is actually more healthily solved by the proposal, by the status quo. Now, then we've got bad role modeling, we've got drugs, alcohol, and guns as the last 3 reasons, which we will address in the argument of the nature of delinquency, which we get to now. Now, we have to take a look at 2 points here. Firstly, there's the good family, the ideal family that they want every child to live in, and there's the bad family. The family that doesn't have the time for its children, when they're immigrants, where they're socially deprived, when they don't have time for their children work, simply they're fighting to survive and cannot support their children. The government, the society has failed them, and now they're going to punish them. Now, we believe that punishing a parent who is unable to keep his family alive, has to work 2 jobs, is not going to solve the problem of minors committing crimes. Because when they recognize the problem in bad families, then deprive these families of their rights, of their ability to keep themselves alive. We believe they only perpetuate the problem and don't solve it at all. Now, let's talk about the good families. When we have rich kids who commit crimes, when these crimes are actually crimes out of revolt against their parents, when these crimes are committed out of the fact that they want to have a rebellion against the society, against their parents. They will not feel any moral obligation to feel sorry for their parents being prosecuted. It's going to give them another reason to revolt against their parents that they so deeply want to hurt that they commit the crime. Now let's get on. We believe that parents cannot be held responsible for each and every crime their children commit. Now, there are some crimes, or most of the crimes that happen, are simply not foreseeable that are going to happen. I believe we do not have to name all of these, but let's just think about Columbine, which is probably one of the most known examples. Those parents cannot be held responsible for the crime of that child because we weren't able to foresee that happening. He was playing a video game that a couple of million of other people were playing. He was dealing with other kids that other people were dealing with. So this crime could not have been foreseen. How were the parents able to stop that massacre?
Okay, but courts can accept this. How about you deal with the woman that sits on the sofa in front of the television, eating fast food, gives her kids some money and tells them to go out on the streets all night? Don't you think that woman would be held responsibility for the knife crime that her son
We
commits?
believe that if that woman would have had the chance to participate fully in our society, she would have seized it. She would have seized the chance, would have gone to work, would have educated her children, and would have done something good. We believe the society inherently holds the fault in failing these families. Now, the third and the last point in my speech. No, thank you. Let's examine the fact of how we deem a minor, whether we expect him to be able to be held responsible for his acts or not. If a child is so young that we believe he or she is not held responsible for his or her acts, we believe that parents cannot be held responsible too. Because we cannot expect that parents are going to keep an eye on their children 100%. Secondly, parents are not the only factor in the socialization of our children. We've got the educational system, the society, the people that children deal in other aspects of their lives, which are not going to be blamed under this proposal. Now, on the other hand, when we deem a person personally responsible for his or her own acts, he or she should be personally responsible, period. If a minor is old enough to be personally responsible, that's it. Why do we need to punish his or her parents when it doesn't serve us any good? So what have we talked to you about? We've seen a government proposal that doesn't solve anything, doesn't show us what exactly they're going to do, and even their 7 reasons are better solved under the status quo and are actually caused by the society at large. The problem of youth crime that they're trying to solve that comes out of bad families, bad habits, bad social conditions they live in is not solved by putting those parents in jail or making them even give up more of their money, which is not even enough for them to survive. So if you want to make a change, vote opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip, for your comments. I'd like to call on the second speaker for the first proposition. Greenland, of course. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen. In my speech, I'm going to be going on to look at the long-term impact that this will have on parents, on kids, and on society as a whole, and how society views the nature of parenting, and how all of those will be beneficial. Before I move on to that, I'd just like to come on to a couple of things that we heard from Philip. Because essentially, what he did not do was dispute the link that we put forward between a lack of parenting and an increased likelihood of poor behaviour, antisocial behaviour amongst kids. That, we believe, is fundamental to this debate, something I'll be coming back to in just a moment. The other thing they said is that, well, society's responsible. It's not the parents' fault, it's society's fault, because society fails the parents as well. What they didn't provide was any indication of how they would actually go about addressing that problem, even if you accept that society bears some of the responsibility. There was nothing in Philip's speech that told you how we would reverse the current increasing trend of juvenile crime. It's something that I really hope Maya will talk about. But before we go on to that, let's look at a couple of the other things they said. Firstly, the nature of delinquency, particularly this sort of throwaway point about, oh, rich kids will want to be nasty to their parents. Yeah, we think the issue about that is that the courts will pretty fairly spot that. And we did put out in our model, and I'll repeat it for the heart of understanding over here,
is that basically judicial discretion will apply, and the courts have that discretion, as we said, to impose a range of punishments, and it's quite possible if the courts believe that the parents truly have no control over the kid, that they will choose not to impose any sentence at all. That's the whole point of judicial discretion. We're not having mandatory sentencing or anything like that. And lastly, this idea that need for individuals to be responsible. We are not removing the requirement, no thanks, Lord. We're not removing the requirement for kids to be prosecuted as well. We believe that kids will continue to bear the same levels of responsibility under our model as they do now. We are just making other people who bear partial responsibility, partially will have to pay part of the cost, which at the moment they do not do. Just on this issue about society failing these parents, child welfare support payments, family support payments, maternity leave, all of these things are society's recognition that parents do have a responsibility and need to maintain that responsibility. And if parents cannot take on that responsibility and feel they are unable to take on that responsibility, part of what we're saying is they have a duty to realise that and not have kids just because they want to and expect society to take care of them. And that is a fundamental abrogation of that responsibility, which we would like to address.
We believe that the biggest punishment for a parent is for his or her child to be taken away by social services, which is the status quo and not apply.
Thanks very much. Well, to be fair, the problem with taking kids away under the status quo, if you believe that's a great punishment, kids who are taken away from their parents are statistically far more likely to exhibit further antisocial behaviour because of the massive emotional trauma that you put on them. Not to mention, if your solution to this is we won't punish them by giving them a fine, we'll punish parents by emotionally traumatising them because we're going to rip their kids away from them and never give them back, we say that that's something you possibly should have outlined in your model. We also think it's madness. Crucially, now let me move on, therefore, to some analysis. No thanks, Steve. Let me move on to some analysis of where we're going to go with this. Because the purpose of an action like ours is it has both a direct and an indirect impact on social responsibility. First of all, what happens in the long term? Your choice to become a parent, as I've said, becomes a much more real and a much more serious one. Both your choice of becoming a parent at all and also your choice of what circumstances you become a parent in. The person or people with whom you have a family support network in order to become a parent. We say that's vital. One of the problems at the moment is exactly what Filip outlined. Parents go, oh, it's society's responsibility to look after my child. And they take no further part in bringing up that child. We say if you have the rights of a legal guardian, you have to take the responsibility as well. If you're not willing to take that responsibility, or you feel you're economically or for whatever other reason unable to take that responsibility, you don't have kids in the first place. Steve.
How do you check for the societal influence on the kids when you're just punishing the parents? How can you say it's always the parents' fault? Isn't this a discouragement against
Thanks very much. We say no. First of all of the current societal checks and balances on children's behaviour remain. We're not abrogating the responsibilities of schools, for example, to care for the kids during the daytime. We're not abrogating the rights of kids. We're saying you still have to bear the punishment. What we're doing, as I keep saying, is we're adding in, there is currently a group, parents, who should bear some of that responsibility, who do not. We are adding them into the system. We're not, in doing so, taking anything away from any of the other parts of that problem. Second, let me go back to these long-term impacts. The second one is how to parent. We say this will force and enforce a review of choices of parenting methods. Whether you stay at home, for example, to look after your kids. And we say that one of the problems in the status quo is that because parents believe they can push those responsibilities off onto the rest of society, they don't adequately reflect on the responsibilities about becoming a parent. We say one of the primary responsibilities, probably the primary responsibility of a parent, is that your role is to prepare your children to become functioning adult members of society, to be able to enter into the social contract which governs society in which we all live. And if you're not going to do that, then you have to bear the responsibility for that. And at the moment, parents are not doing so. Thirdly, let's look at the impact on the kids. Unlike Filip, we don't believe that kids will go, oh, hey, I get my parents into trouble and kick on. Because it's those sorts of parents that when kids do that, those parents won't get into trouble, as I've explained through our mechanism. But we say, firstly, most kids don't want to get their parents in trouble, particularly if they have been brought up by parents who have instilled in them the need not to get into trouble because suddenly the parents have a real indirect part to play in the consequences of that. Therefore, we say kids will be brought up with a respect for social norms. Kids will finally be brought up with a respect for societal behaviour, which means that antisocial behaviour will go down. The net result of this is not going to be hundreds of thousands of parents being chucked into prison because their kids do stuff. It will be the fact that those parents impress on the kids the importance of not doing those things in the first place, which means that we have a reduction in those antisocial behaviours which currently come about because kids do feel they can act with impunity. They do feel there's no oversight. They also feel that no one actually cares about them. And what this does is it implements all of those things. And finally, what this does is better support for parenting, because what this process will do is it will highlight those parents who are currently not fulfilling their burden of parenting responsibility. And part of what our model does is it identifies those people and it permits a level of support. In the same way that if you're a drink driver, you both get punished and you also get compelled to go to alcohol rehab classes and so on and get support, we'd say that comes into our model as well. What we are doing, ladies and gentlemen, is we are identifying a problem with the system. We are identifying the people who cause that problem, and we're solving it by targeting them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, for your comments. Now let's call upon the second speaker for the first opposition, Maya. You hold the floor.
Sorry. So the basic premise on which the governmental arguments stand on is that parents do not suffer enough in the status quo. Well, basically, we can see two types of parents in the status quo. Parents that really care about their children, that really want the best for their children, and we say these parents really suffer when their children are punished. But then there's another type of parents. Parents that really don't care, parents that don't take care enough for their children. And we say that those won't care even after you punish. Not only that, we say it will be worse off for the child because that parent will feel that the child is responsible for his bad well-being, and that's why it will go and punish the child more, in a sense that it will either create more domestic violence as a response to children's sending or punishing the parent, or anything else. So that's why they did not approve that. Well, basically, in my speech, I want to do firstly some refutation, and then I'll talk about why do we need a society where a child is individually responsible for his crime. But let me go to some refutation firstly, because Sam talks about what we didn't provide to the link, because how lack of parenting results sometimes, or proportionally, sometimes in criminal behavior. But we say exactly because we have a status quo in which if parents do, or we believe as a judicial system, as a country, that parents' behavior would create criminal behavior of children, we accuse them of negligence. So the status quo we're talking about is we have this safety mechanism that every parent that could create the status in which a child could become a criminal is accused. But because justice is not blind, we do not accuse all parents. And that's what they're doing. They're accusing simply all parents because they see that all the parents are negligent. And further on, we say, not only that, this diminishes the value of the concept of negligence, because we strongly see that negligence is a really important crime and the child suffers. But when every parent that his child does a crime is accused of negligence, this only diminishes the value of negligence, because basically everyone can be then seen negligent, and all those serious crimes, serious cases are sent into the same criteria. So
Madam, if you believe that juvenile crime is the fault of society, what is your side proposing to do to stop the rise in juvenile crime?
So yeah, and then they say, well, yeah, so what if the society is guilty? Now we need a measure that will diminish or minimize the value, the rise of crime. So firstly, we say, if a proposal is unjust, we won't accept it only because it could have some quantitative results. Further on, they didn't directly prove that it has quantitative results. And further on, we say it's counterproductive. And this is what I'll be talking about in my argument when I will tell you how it sends a message to children that they're not responsible for their own actions. No, thank you. Now, further on, when we talk about society, we have to understand, and this tackles their argument already, that their proposal targets minorities especially. Why? Because we say minorities are a part of our society that are economically the most viable, the most targeted. Now, we know that the greatest proportion of children that does crimes are actually children from the minorities. And now, if you say that it's the parents' fault that for their crimes, you say basically that yes, we as a society made something wrong, were wrong that by creating this bad economic status of these minorities, but now we will punish you for basically our crime. Well, this is not how things should be solved. If you really agree that we have economic problems that lead to minority violence, well, let's target these economic problems. Let's start economic or social programs, and not to just target the result of these problems. Let's target the cause of these problems. No, thank you. Now, further, let me now just tackle the last point they talked about. How, well, if parents really can't control or predict the child, then we won't punish them. Well, that is kind of counter what they were talking in their first argument, when they were talking about how, well, it's justice is blind. Basically, we will punish everyone of negligence who is not, whose parents, whose children commits a crime. Now, this leads me to my argument, because what I want to tell you is that we need a society where you, as an individual, are responsible for your own crimes. Because the message the government sends in the state with their proposal is, yes, you committed a crime, we accused you, but you're a minor, and that's why basically your parents are responsible as well. Now, this creates a situation where we're not sure who's responsible anymore. On one side, we're claiming, yes, the child is responsible, but how can you claim that still if you're punishing this, the parent? Now, this double sentencing is basically either stupid because it does not tackle the responsible one, either it basically does not do anything, because what it will send to children, the message it will send to young delinquents is, well, my parents are responsible for my crimes, it is not my responsibility. And that's why basically I can do all these crimes, because it's my parents that made me do these crimes. So this is actually the problem we're seeing in their proposal. We have to stop this. We have to stop this double sentencing where because we need a situation where it's clear who's responsible one. And when it will be clear who's responsible one, because we see it's clear that they themselves claim the individual minor delinquent is responsible, it can go fully through the process of reconciliation, of punishing, and then clearly returning to the society, to normal productive life. And that's why, because they didn't actually prove us they're diminishing the number of crimes, but only creating greater injustice, we beg you to oppose.
Thank you, Maya, for your comments, and thank you to the opening teams. To continue the case for a second proposition, I'd like to call upon Samuel.
Little Johnny's got a gun he took from his dad, and he puts it in his black book bag. with black fingernails and black mask, he's going to go out and blow away the girl who wouldn't take him to the dance. Now, they believe that it stops, that it stops with Johnny, and we believe that it doesn't, because his dad wasn't just guilty of not locking up the gun. He was guilty of not asking Johnny why there were scars on his arms. He never asked the question, how's school going? He never cared. And the thing that he didn't do was that Johnny's dad didn't just do this because he forgot to, because he didn't have time. He intentionally did it. And as his kid was being hauled away, he was thinking, good for me, I don't have to take care of him anymore. And if you don't believe this happened, sir, then you need to step out of the middle class. Because this happens all of the time. Not among all levels of our society. And so, their side fundamentally lacks of faith in parents and kids. They lack faith in kids because they think nothing can be done. They think that even if we give the kids the opportunity to succeed, that they won't. And they believe also that they don't have a faith in parents. Because we believe that if you gave parents the responsibility, they would step up to that responsibility. And so first what I'm going to do is talk about the first point that they made, talk about the point that Philip made, and then I'm going to go on to my new matter, explain why it's new, explain why it matters, and tell you how it works before wrapping up what I've said. So, first thing I want to say is talk to Maya's point. And this was that she says that we should be alone. She says that individuality and individual total responsibility is the key to our society. We disagree. We refuse to be alone. Maybe back when we were cave people, all caring for our own land, this model works. But we believe at the point where you're in a society where your problems are mine and we're one and the same, then we can no longer be in this state where we don't care about one another.
But in this case, we say society is more guilty than the parent, and that's why, let's say society is co-responsible with the child and not the parent.
Okay, well that's the thing, is that if society is responsible, then what should society do to atone for this? We believe that they should take a measure like ours that would recognize their guilt, and that the state should pass it because the state does have a responsibility and they've been failing to do so. And so then she said that they need to be individually punished, but we're still going to be individually punishing the kids, which is also going to be punishing the parents. And furthermore, we believe it's this ideology that says that you're alone, that causes kids to commit crimes in the first place, and parents to allow it to happen. Because if kids felt like society was taking a stake in them, like society cared what they did, then they might not act out against it. If parents believed that they weren't individually responsible just for what they were doing, but what their kids were doing too, then they take an active role. So we not only disagree with them, but we believe that the mindset that they're bringing into this debate is responsible for the kind of behavior that we're seeing here. And now on to Philip's points. First of all, he said that poor parents can't raise kids. He said that poor parents can't raise kids. First of all, this is offensive. And second of all, like for instance, my grandfather was an immigrant. He worked 2 jobs. And he raised my father in a house without running water. And yet my father was able to be a lawyer, was able to grow up. And we believe that if it's really true that no poor parent can raise a kid correctly, then why aren't all the poor kids criminals? The evidence that not all poor kids are criminals proves that some parents are clearly doing a good enough job to overcome this. Yes, sir.
Let's turn the table around. If Johnny becomes a scientist, makes lots of money, does the state then is obliged to give the parents money and the same kind of endowment that Johnny has?
And you know what? If you sincerely believe this, then why don't we set a precedent for this kind of responsibility by passing our measure today? So first of all, this idea that poor parents can't raise kids is ridiculous. And second of all, going on to this idea that that kids are going to commit crimes to get at their parents, well, we believe that this again shows their lack of faith in kids. They do not like them. They think that no matter what we do, that they're going to commit these crimes anyway, so that there's nothing to be done. This is a question of naivety versus reality. So, on to my new matter. The top of the table talks about, like, they address negligence. And we're going to go further, and we're going to also talk about how this not only affects unintentional negligence, but intentional negligence, and which is tantamount to encouraging the crimes to happen. Then they also talk about how this would work. We're going to show where this has worked, namely in the medical community with the idea of standard of care and why we should apply this to parenting. So on to my first contention, which is that unless we punish negligence, we reward parents for it. And the status quo, parents want their children to commit crimes a lot of the time. And the reason is they didn't want these kids to begin with. And so what happens a lot of the times is that they will know their kids are rolling with a gang. They will know their kids are dealing drugs. And the parents are the first ones to call the cops because they don't want to raise this. And again, I've worked in juvenile justice. I've worked with legal aid. And I've seen this happen time and time again. This idea that the state has to take responsibility for them, that the parents just offload this on the state. Well, we believe that if parents are offloading this responsibility to get rid of their kids on the state, then the state should probably put some responsibility back on the parents. And that's what the first government here talked about. And the bottom line here is that if we pass our measure, parents are going to see that their self-interest is intrinsically linked to the self-interest of their child, and we're going to see fewer crimes being committed and fewer kids ruining their lives because they weren't given the opportunity to do so. And moreover, on my second one, we reject the difference between misfeasance, malfeasance, and non-feasance. Malfeasance is when a parent gives the kid the gun and tells them to commit the crime. We prosecute for that. But we don't prosecute for misfeasance, which is a parent knowing and turning a blind eye, and we don't prosecute for non-feasance, which was the parent not asking. And the parallel here is that in medicine, it doesn't matter how you screwed up. If you screwed up, you're held responsible. This is what the standard of care is. Once you step up to care for it, once you become a doctor, then you have to provide a certain acceptable level of care. And what this does is, one, it deters people from taking on the responsibility who shouldn't have handled it in the first place, but two, it means that once you step up to the plate, once you're a parent, then you have to care what happens to the other person. And this, in medicine, has led to a much higher care for patients. So we believe that this idea of holding people not individually responsible, but responsible for the actions that are under their sphere of influence, that this is going to lead to more. So we've shown you why kids behave badly, and we reject their notions of this. We've showed you why society matters and why we should care about each other and how this law does this. We believe that if you believe that society has failed, then let society succeed today. Let us pass this measure so that we can atone for the failures that we are all responsible for. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, for your comment. And to open the case for the second opposition, I'd like to call on Steve.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming out to listen to this very interesting debate. I think it was a pretty interesting debate so far. And I'm a big fan of sort of the philosophy behind the government case because I really like the carrot and the stick approach to doing government models. I kind of like that, except there's two problems with the carrot and stick approach, and I know you'll probably disagree and be ready to stand up for a point here, but I think the first problem with it is that there's no real way that they've taught parents in the status quo that the carrot is something good for them. Right? There's really no way. They talk about these parents who haven't been taught or given the kind of support that they need to raise their children correctly. What's their plan? Well, we'll give that as part of the punishment. That's what they say. That's one of the things the courts could rule is that they have to go to mandatory parenting classes. So before you put a reward on the end of the stick, you have to educate people that that's a good thing, that's something they should know how to do. They're not doing that. And secondly, the other problem with it is they take the carrot and the string and throw it away and beat the kid with the stick and then beat the parents with the stick too. And that's not a way to do it at all. So before I get into my new matter, I want to do a little refutation here. I want to spend a little bit of time on what we just heard from Sam, which was actually pretty interesting stuff. This stuff about, little Johnny. I think my partner made a pretty good point that the whole deal here is if little Johnny goes to Harvard, or the school of your choice, some great school, maybe St. John's University in your city. Just, any school you pick. It makes a ton of money. Do we then reward the parents and say, you did a wonderful job, here's a bunch of money for you as well? What do you say?
So we're equally not punishing parents for what their children do once they've reached the age of majority. Parents can benefit from the good things that their children do when they're still children. Okay,
so if they can benefit from the way that they... okay, so the problem with this... it's a pretty good answer, so I'm going to have to think about it for a second. But I do think that the problem with this is after they reach the age of majority, they're no longer responsible. But the problem is the parents are already above the age of majority. Why are you holding them responsible for things that minors are doing? This flies in the face of the way we construct law in the West in the first place, which is based on individual rights, based on these sorts of things, and it sort of is going to undermine the structure of Western law. No, thank you, sir. That is going to be a big problem. And the reason that it's a big problem is it's going to diffuse the responsibility. I'm going to get to that in my new matter in just a minute. This will be a legal nightmare, is my other refutation point. If you did this policy, it's going to be a huge legal nightmare. How do you determine the influence? We haven't heard anything about how you determine the influence, whether it's television, whether it's video games, whether it's the parents. How do you hold them responsible? We haven't heard anything about that. There hasn't been any sort of discussion about how you make that, no thank you, how you make that distinction. Now, for those of you in debate, you might be thinking of a career in law school. It's a good idea to support this proposal because you'll be guaranteed a job as an attorney, sorting out this mess of where and who you can prosecute and who you can hold responsible. There's plenty of guaranteed jobs in that, and that is not very good. Now, they talk about, Sam talked a little bit about doctors. I know I've kind of gotten out of order here. About doctors and how doctors are a good model for this with negligence in care. But doctors move on, folks. They cure the disease, they move on, they don't ever see that patient again. Doctors don't have that kind of lifetime responsibility of the person. It's sort of a bad metaphor and a bad model. And it also shows sort of why what's being proposed by the government is very status quo. Sam pointed this out very well, because if you have this negligence issue, which is sort of what their entire case is based on, this is pretty much the status quo that we prosecute for negligence. We prosecute for all kinds of negligence now, and this is what happens in the status quo. It is a bad precedent to set for law and all these things. So, doctors move on, and no thank you. Doctors move on, and they don't take care of them a long time. And then there's another problem with the doctor's metaphor as well. And the other problem is we give lawyers and we give doctors the kind of protection when they're speaking to people who they're working with where they don't have to disclose certain things. They are going to pit parents against kids in legal battles to force them to testify against each other with no kinds of legal protections that even physicians or lawyers would enjoy. How do you work that out, sir?
Well, so first of all, you say this is a nightmare change legislation and also the status quo. Interesting. But more to the point, if you don't believe that our proposal is going to solve juvenile crime, once again, what is your side going to do to solve the problem?
I think that the solution of juvenile crime is to focus on individual law, which is the status quo. That's what we've heard from the first opposition. That's what we're advocating in the second opposition. But I'm going to extend sort of what the difference is here when I get to my new matter here in just 1 second. I do want to make one other point of reputation, which is the entire rhetoric of this side of the table is really entrenched in a middle-class model of parenting. A middle-class model that comes out of the bourgeois 19th century. That the best way to parent is to be at home reading stories by the fire and to influence your kids and make sure you're there for them to watch them all the time. This is discriminatory against poor people. This is discriminatory against single mothers. This is discriminatory against single fathers. It is a bad way of thinking and a bad way of talking about modern families and modern parenting, and I think you should reject them alone on the basis of this kind of rhetoric, because that model is one that's not very good. No, thank you. I'm sorry, I just don't have the time. I'd love to talk about it with you later, though. All right. So I think on that point, no thank you, on that point, we see the problem with blaming these sorts of problems. Like little Johnny, he goes to a school, Sam. Little Johnny has teachers. Little Johnny has friends. Why aren't they being held to the same level of responsibility for not noticing these things if he's going to go and shoot people who didn't go to the dance with him? I just don't understand how this is going to be fixed. Now, let me get to my new matter, because I like to develop this in quite a bit of detail. Loke and I want to present you with a gift tonight, a gift looking into our crystal ball of a glimpse of what future society is going to look like if you do this model that they proposed. What is this society going to look like? Here's what you get. One, you get the corporatization of parental culture. What you get is a model that treats parents as if they are stock investors, that they're investing in their children, that they're buying stock into their children. They should suffer losses for investing in the market of their child. This is a terrible model for how to raise children. They talk about, some people shouldn't have kids, some people should have kids. Whatever, I think that should be left up to individuals. It should be treated like a stock market. That's bad. Secondly, you get estranged parent and child relations, where children will use this as a bargaining chip against their parents. They'll say things like, "Oh, Dad, can I borrow the car?" "No, I'm going to steal it," and then you're going to get in trouble for me stealing the car. That's exactly what you get. So the plan, and finally, they collapse the is and the ought. They leave out this important level of discussion between parents and kids of what you ought to do, how you ought to behave. This is our social fabric, ladies and gentlemen. This is the way we should run our society. They just give you an is. It's the parent's fault. That's it. No discussion. They're going to get blamed. You don't get that discussion, which is essential to good law based on individual rights. So in the future, the corporatization of parental culture, the problem that they are status quo, and the problem that they erode the model of Western law are reasons why you should oppose it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve, for your comments. And to conclude this case, aside second proposition, I'd like to call upon Lucas, your floor.
Thank you very much. Truly my pleasure to be here today. And what I'm going to begin by doing is refuting some of the things that were said by Steve, or some of the few things that were said by Steve. I'm going to do the best that I can with many words to refute few words. And then I'm going to go on to recrystallize this debate under two important questions, in which, when answered, will clearly show that we are taking active action, and they are taking no action, and that therefore it is not surprising that all of the arguments, and all of the impacts, and all of the consequences flow to a side that is actually trying to improve society. It's really easy to stand there and break things down, but debate is about trying to build things up, building up ideas, building up solutions, and these are places where this side has clearly failed. So, just to go on to refute some of the things said by Steve, and even to refute some of his refutation, he says, well, this will create a legal nightmare because then you'll have all of these new prosecutions, it'll be hard to pursue. Well, we think that this completely ignores the impact of reducing crime, which is what our plan does. And it does not surprise me that their refutation does not bring into consideration reducing crime, because that's not what they're trying to do. They have given us no suggestions, no plans, no ways to actually reduce juvenile crime. So therefore it is not surprising that when he says, oh, it'll be a judicial nightmare, of course it will, because you're not acknowledging that crime will be reduced. You're ignoring the fact that we're actually taking proactive measures. And that's something that you're, quite frankly, not doing. So, additionally, they defend the status quo. That's their plan. Their plan is to say, well, we're going to reduce crime by pursuing the status quo. I don't understand. If we acknowledge that the status quo isn't working, then how are we just going to continue to do things that aren't working? How will that reduce crime? Simply put, it will not. And they're actually supporting a status quo which is inherently contradictory of the earlier team, because it is quite contradictory, because the status quo protects children. That's why they're minors. They have protection under the law because we understand that they are not solely responsible for their actions. So you want to perpetuate a status quo in which we acknowledge that people aren't solely responsible for their actions as minors, when there's his point was that people are all responsible as individuals, and how can you perpetuate a status quo which completely rejects this notion? Philip, try it.
Are you trying to run against your first team by proposing more responsibility to minors?
We think more responsibility for everybody is good, but we think it goes beyond that, and we think that actually what you're doing is you're reducing and diluting responsibility between everybody. And because when something is everything, something is nothing. And this is quite simply, well, it's everybody's fault. It's everybody's fault, so therefore we can't do anything. Let's just keep on going like nothing happened. This is quite honestly not correct. And then now Steve's extension is about corporatization of parenting. And now this is bad, because we shouldn't encourage parents to take stock in their children. Well, maybe if people took stock in their children the way they took stock in their corporations, maybe that might actually be a little bit better. Economic crisis right now aside, we think that the status quo is that people aren't taking stock in their children. And we believe that even if it is going in a roundabout way, that people caring about their children is a good thing. Not caring too much, that's not the issue. You're saying that people will be caring too much about their children, and therefore there'll be some nefarious effects of this. We say the fact is that the status quo, people aren't caring about their children. So if we can encourage that, if we can incentivize people to take stock in their children, that's something we have a responsibility as a state to do.
Point of information.
Go ahead.
You're claiming your case is based on the premises that parents do not care about the children, but we say if children make crime, that does not mean parents do not care about them.
Well, you completely ignore our extension, which is actually acknowledging the fact that a large number of these cases are actually not mere negligence, which is all you have talked about. It is not mere passive negligence, it is active negligence. It is trying to shed this burden of economic and social weight, which is because many of these people who are having children didn't want to have children, can't provide for their children. And now what you want to do is say, oh, well, you can't treat your children? Well, don't worry, we'll take them off your hands. We'll clothe them. We'll feed them. And then what happens to the parents? Nothing. So I'm going to go on to crystallize this debate into 2 points. One, Why do kids commit crime, and whose responsibility is it? They say parents are responsible, or we say parents are responsible and parents have the power. And this was brought up in a number of ways which actually weren't even responded to actively and engaged upon. We said things like the presence of alcohol, the presence of guns, the presence of firearms in a house. We say the presence of things like establishing low self-esteem, not engaging in your child's welfare. These are real things that happen. And then they say that, oh no, it's society's fault. They say society is the one who is at blame because life is hard, right? Because life is hard, so therefore how can we punish people who don't meet the challenge? Well, we say that every single person in here is responsible for meeting that challenge. And then we believe that that is something that must be done. You can't just say life is hard, therefore people who fail, well, that's not their fault. That's life's fault. That's society's fault. We completely reject this notion. Sir, no. Okay, so, and this is additionally contradictory because they say it's society's fault. It's the state's fault. It's societal forces. Well, why are we the only ones who suggesting that society do something about it? We are the only ones who suggesting that there is a solution. That if there is shared responsibility, as we suggest, mainly on the part of the parent, but within society as well, then how are you just, then the fact that what you're doing is you're allowing society to just do nothing. And if you acknowledge, as they claim, that society is partly to blame for the acts of children, then why shouldn't society be the one to take action? They should be. And that is exactly what we are proposing today. So, why do kids commit crimes? We say it's the parents, because we say parents have an inordinate and a disproportionate amount of influence on their children's lives when compared to the various and ephemeral effects of society. And they say society is at fault. But then we come to this more interesting point, which is really where the debate boils down to. How can we reduce juvenile crime? Because that's what the point. That's what everybody wants to do, right? Reduce crime. What's their suggestion? Nothing. Do what we're doing. Do what we're doing. Do more of it. Oh, well, we say it's not working. They say do it more. Status quo, which is inherently contradictory to their own team. But we say, no. What we need to do is deter parents from purposely allowing or encouraging criminal activity of their kid so they can shed the burden, shed the economic, shed the social burden of a child who is delinquent. And then we're actually taking, since this is a large, actually, contribution to the criminal activity of children, which has not been mentioned through this entire debate, this is a unique impact, and this is a unique argument that hasn't been addressed. What we need to do is we need to change the focus of self-interest. Right now, we reward parents who are terrible at their job, and we reward them by taking their burden off their hand when they can't meet the challenge. We say they do it in their self-interest. How can you not expect a parent to do what is in their self-interest by allowing their kid to be taken from them? We say make it in their self-interest to be a good parent, to take the stock, because we want parents to take stock in their kids. And if you don't, then vote for them. But if you do want parents to take stock in their kids, whatever that stock may be, then please vote for proposition.
Thank you, Lucas, for your comments, and to conclude this debate as a whole, I'd like to call upon Loke.
Good evening, everybody. If you would pardon my accent, if you don't understand it, too bad. Now, I need to tell you a story. Back in China, 5,000 years ago, where my grandparents came from, there is law. If you are a government official, you make a mistake, you commit a crime, the emperor will say, not only do you die, but your whole family too. And they'll take away all your farmland and all your property, and everything goes. That's exactly the thing they're trying to do in reverse, which is when a child commits a crime, not only do you punish the kid, you also punish the parent. We say that's barbaric, we say that's brutal, and that's going backward in the movement towards more civilized way of living, and certainly not in EU, maybe in Singapore then. So the first thing they always ask before I go on to my summary is that they say, what are you doing about this? We are doing something. We're trying to do some crime. We're trying to make parents responsible. We're trying to make parents more aware before they become parents that when they have a child, they have this certain obligation. We agree. We agree that your job as a government team, especially the British staff, that you're supposed to propose a good policy for us to accept. We in the opposition are not obliged to give you a counter-argument, a counter-model. Our job is to critique you and to tell you that there's a bad policy. Until you come up with something better, then we may agree with you. So don't give us this crap about we have. No, you should know better, Sam, coming from Britain. So we say to you, it is not our obligation to give you a counter model. And if there's anything I would say to incentivize, as Debbie want to say, parents, incentivization normally comes with carrot, not a big stick. So her point was to incentivize parents by giving a big stick. So we say that is not that's called a negative reinforcement in the teaching service. So we don't know that. So let me just summarize the debate by asking the following question. First question is, how would you stop knife crime in UK? First question. Second question is, are parents already being punished right now if the kids commit crime and they are sent to juvenile delinquent center? The third question is, will children behave better after your legislation? And the last question is this legislation fair to all parents? So let's, yes sir.
Under the status quo, when minors are prosecuted, that it is recognised they're not fully responsible for their actions. Who do you think is responsible for the remaining part, and how should they pay for it?
Okay. Yes, we believe that parents are responsible, but we don't believe that if you criminalize the parents, it will solve the problem of parent negligence. That's my problem with your case. So let's get on to the first part of the debate, where Debbie came out and said, there's a lot of knife crime in the UK, and we need to do something about it. Yes. And the second house tried to tell us that is the problem we have to solve. Reduce crime in UK or any part of the world. You hear the link between gun crime, knife crime, and how this problem will solve it? None of them solved it. It was a very fuzzy, abstract notion of this will solve the problem, because intuitively they think that more deterrence means more pain, and more pain means less crime. It was never clearly analyzed for you that this will solve knife crime in UK. Secondly, are parents already been punished? Which is the contention of our first opposition, and I believe they're right. Parents, no parents bring a child into the world. I'm a parent, none of them are. Bring a child to the world in order to neglect the child, let the child be a criminal, and then make use of the child, and they say intentionally, to be a pimp, to be a prostitute, and to be a crack seller, which is the second house extension. We say we reject that. The greatest love of all is mother's love. Second to Jesus, unconditional love. So we say to you that notion that parents knowingly neglect the child does not.
On that point.
And no, thank you. Maybe somebody from the second time, they've been very quiet. Okay? We say to you that parents are being punished already. No, thank you. Maybe if Johnny stand up, I'll answer. Maybe Johnny stand up later. So we say that parents are being punished now. The emotional trauma, the pain of having a child being sent away, being punished, is good enough punishment. And which of you as parents would not agonize and not be pained by that? So we say, we answer that question. And third question, will the children that you have after this legislation become better? Where is the mechanism beside the stick approach to help the child become better? We hear nothing from them. So therefore, no thank you. Johnny, please. So we say to them, if you want to have this pass, there must be some other mechanism for us to believe that beside the stick, there's some kind of reward, which is what my POI was about. If Johnny does well, makes a lot of money, do you pay the parents on top and above the millions that Johnny is making? The answer is no. We don't pay the kid parents for the good they do, and we don't pay the kid. We don't make the parents suffer too after the kid make a mistake. So that is the question we ask. The last one is this legislation fair to all parents? We have clearly said before that. Yes, Johnny.
Okay. So if you believe that society is responsible and we all live in the same society, then what creates the difference between kids that commit crimes and kids that don't if it's not for the parents?
Yeah.
We agree with you. Okay? We agree with that. Yes, society is responsible. The whole debate is who is really responsible for stabbing somebody. We say that if I stab young Fischer, I'm responsible. Debbie, my mother, is not. She's somewhere in Geneva attending to UN problem. So we say it compounds the problem to have shared responsibility because we diffuse the idea of responsibility altogether, legally, socially, and even within the family structure. So finally, like I said before, is this really fair to all parents? We say no. Obviously, if you heard Maya and Philip, we know that some parents are not making ends meet. They have 3 jobs. They're not there. There's no 24/7 parents. And no middle class parent which they give you the abstraction of we must have work-life balance, we must read to Johnny, and we must take care of them. What about single parents? What about divorced parents? What about parents who are women themselves? So to end this debate, we say to you that that law will not make the world better. We say it will make the world worse, and we say that until they come up with something better, we will not vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Before you run off, here's what I would suggest. Have all the teams shake hands. You guys go over your notes, take a 5-minute break, okay? Don't run off, come back, because then we can quickly talk about this debate and see what has been going on. Just so you get a little air in your heads, you have something to say.
Yes. Okay. We need to do 2 more things tonight after that in order to have a full day tomorrow. First, you're going to need to find a debate partner. You cannot debate tomorrow without a debate partner. Okay? So start thinking about that now. Second thing is, we have a bunch of elective classes. We want you to just tick off the ones you like, so we can make sure to offer the ones you like. You have to have this data in order to schedule tomorrow. So if you run away, you can't help us. But where are you going to go? You're in Vermont. There's nothing to do.
Take 5 minutes, have a short break, and then come back to you.
Just say,
done with that debate. Anyways,